Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen.
I'm Debbie.
And today we're going to be talking about how to create or find joy in your life. I know that this is something that maybe people do, maybe people don't. I know we're a little bit more intentional now with words and how we communicate things for ourselves and for others recently and in the last several years of, I don't know, this generation, I think, where we have kind of had more intentionality about how we live our lives and how we have to find joy for ourselves in all of life's major and minor shenanigans. So I think it's really important to find joy anytime in your life, but definitely when you're going through it, like whether it's, being laid off or if you're having a major transition in your life. There's so many reasons and ways to find joy in your life, and I'm so excited to talk with my mom about that today and hear her perspective on how we do that because it's not always easy to do that. I can sit here and say, "Oh yeah, I go on walks and I journal and I meditate," but realistically, maybe I meditate once every 3 months, and some weeks it's really hard for me to even leave the house and go outside and do things that are good for myself. So I definitely struggle with doing things that are good for me and things that I even enjoy doing. I've been trying to go to a tap class for the last 4 weeks and I haven't been able to get myself to go. So there's so many struggles and hurdles to even finding joy and creating joy in your life. What are some of the ways, Mom, that you create joy in your life? And did
I
you
think,
always do this?
well, I was going to talk about that. The
Mm-hmm.
idea of creating joy, I don't think was something I ever grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just thought it was you either were sad or happy, right? I don't know that I ever intentionally thought about creating joy, and I'm not sure when I was growing up that people actually talked about creating joy. I think they did things. I think I noticed that there were people who were more creative
Mm-hmm.
and they were building creativity into their life because that was a natural thing for them, or they pursued hobbies. But I never thought of it as the label creating joy. I think
Hmm.
people did things that they liked to do based on their level of interest, right? So
Yeah.
when I was growing up, my dad liked photography, and so cameras were a thing, and he took pictures of us and other things. He also liked to build miniature models, aircraft models, but also he did ship models when I was growing up, small ones. He also made balsa and tissue planes that you could fly, which would always crash, and I would always feel bad because then he'd have to put the whole thing back together again. So he was really into that kind of stuff. My mom painted and she drew. And of course, she sang and she did art projects with us. But I would imagine those were things that brought them joy,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember them ever saying, "Oh, I'm creating joy," or "Let's
Right.
create joy," or "I'm finding joy in this." I think I just assumed that what they were doing was something they enjoyed doing. So
Right.
I would change the creating joy to enjoyment,
Mm.
maybe. That
Mm-hmm.
people did something that brought them enjoyment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Right. So thinking about it now and talking about those things, it's interesting because I don't think that I ever cultivated a hobby like my father did.
No.
Yeah, I really didn't do that. I know that for a very short period of time in the 80s, I was doing latch hook rugs,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I finished the rug, but I never made it a rug or a pillow.
Yeah.
It just was what it was, and I never I never went further on and had it bound or put it on the floor or made it into a pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Dabbled very short time with needlepoint, but I'm mostly a paper and pencil hobbyist. I like to do crossword puzzles
You do.
and work with number puzzles,
Yeah.
that
Things
kind
for
of
the
thing.
brain.
Yeah, I didn't really do a lot of making of things.
Yeah.
Right, and I was a utilitarian cook. I didn't do things that I didn't purposely create recipes or follow recipes because of the joy of cooking. I just cooked because I basically had to survive.
Had to.
And right. And
Hmm.
now I'm finding a little bit more joy in the actual process of cooking.
Yeah.
But I think that for the majority of my life, I felt like I was on some kind of fast motion thing. And
Like
so
a
even
conveyor belt?
kind of, but like even now I have to chuckle and say, why are you trying to get all these things done so quickly? There's no children, there's no job. You're not
Hmm.
pressed for those time constraints that I had before, but I have that pattern of behavior of having still raising kids and I still or working where I had a certain length of time to do things and get them done. So now I'm
Yeah.
trying to elongate things and settle into the process of creating the meal or,
Hmm.
sitting down and doing something solitary as opposed to feeling like I only have a certain amount of time.
Right.
When you guys were small, I remember my neighbor saying to me, "Your car goes in and out of this driveway like every 20 minutes." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm dropping or picking up or making a Target run or getting my hair cut real quick or doing errands while the kids are in school." And so I'm in and out all the time. It
Yeah.
was so weird,
Hmm.
um, especially because of the 5 year difference between you and your brother, it was like you were in school for half the day, and then I picked you up, and then he was in school the rest of the day, and then I picked him up, and then where we dropped off him. So it was a lot of that
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
So I remember trying to get a lot of things done in a short period of time, and I still have that mentality. I think also
Me
because my
too.
dad, maybe New Yorkers have that mentality, being that my family was all from New York.
Sure.
My dad used to say things like in the parking lot when people were walking, less talky, more walky. So he would, and in the store he would say, "Keep up with me," and he would walk, and I would
Oh
have to
my
keep up with
God.
him. So I feel like I've always had this feeling like had to do things quickly, and that was admired. Being fast
Yes.
was kind of admired,
Totally. I
right?
remember when I was in piano lessons, my piano teacher, he'd be like, "You can slow down. You don't have to play this piece fast." And
Yeah.
I've never been able to slow down
Right.
when I'm doing an activity in some
Yeah.
ways. Like I can sit on the couch and chill out,
Right.
but it's different. I don't know, when I'm doing an activity or trying to show someone something, I just rush through things. So I wonder if that's the same type of mentality that you're speaking of.
Yeah, I think I have, and if it's to me when you're telling me about telling it back to me, I feel like I have an efficiency button,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so I can do things fast, so it's easy for me to do things quickly.
Mhm.
So I do notice, even though I'm not working or have kids to be responsible for, I do realize that when I'm going out somewhere, like I'm getting my hair cut or I have a lunch date, that I will do things up until the very last. I could get that done in an hour. Okay, but I have more time than that, but I
I
still
know.
see it as compressed time,
Yeah, me too.
right?
That's
It's
interesting.
so
Yeah, I
weird.
mean, it is weird, and I can relate to you as well because I'm still currently not working, and it's weird because I'm in a mid-retirement feeling in my 30s.
Well, you are working for yourself.
I am.
So there are those moments of work.
There are, sure. Yes, I do have one client, which is awesome. So cool. Get me
Right.
more. No, I'm kidding. But what I'm learning from not working right now is that I find a lot of joy in space and being able to have the space to just kind of do things on my timeline.
You're talking about
Like,
time. You're talking about time space,
I,
not
yeah,
actual physical space.
no, yeah, I'm talking about time space where you can kind of get up, dictate how your morning goes, and then sit down and do whatever you want to do that day. It's like this flexibility. I think flexibility in my schedule brings me a lot of joy, and flexibility in creating my own schedule brings me a lot of joy. And I think when you're talking about creating or making dinner, and just rush, rush, rush because you only have an hour to make dinner and eat it, and then you have to do all these other things, to get ready for the next day when you're working. It's like, oh, like for me, it's really nice because I can just make dinner and I still want to make it fast because I just kind of want to get it over with, I guess. But also I'm trying to find the joy in doing these kind of regular mundane tasks
Right.
because I have the space to do them and the time to do them, and it makes me have a fuller and richer life when I'm not rushing all the time. And then I can help my partner to get ready for their day because they have to have water bottles and the lunch made and they have to have a lot of stuff for the next day. And I don't, I can just make that for myself the next day. So it's nice to be able to do that for someone and also take care of household stuff because of this time space.
Right. And also because you have previously worked remotely and you're still working remotely, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to go somewhere for work, whereas your partner does not work remotely, so they have
Yeah.
to prepare for being out.
Yeah.
You have the refrigerator
I
at
have the,
home,
I know.
so it makes it easier.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I feel like I do the same thing now that I'm retired, that I make sure that it can be a burden a little bit because I make sure that we have food for dinner and like, oh God, it's another dinner. Sometimes we're sitting after dinner and I go, okay, one more meal down because I successfully fed us
Mm-hmm.
and now I have to think of another one for the next day, right? And so now I have to get more into that mode of finding joy in menu planning and doing the shopping. I didn't want to do any of that when I was working because I wanted to have some downtime for joy,
Mm-hmm.
my own enjoyment.
Right.
But now that I'm not working, I can fit all those snippets of time in between the tasks. And then I can help him out because I can do the things that he can't do while he's working.
Mm-hmm.
So I can be efficient in that respect,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Not wanting to take away things that, like, he used to like to go shopping, but now I've taken that task. So I'm like,
Yeah.
well, if you really are pining for it, I'm not like married to the idea of going to shopping, but you can do it if you want to. You don't want to take certain tasks people like to do, and they want to continue doing it. But I was thinking that I was
Yeah.
always very enamored watching people who lived on farms or who broadcast themselves now on Instagram, and they just really enjoy the picking of the veggies and the washing of the this and the
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the linens, and everything looks so romantic until you're the one actually doing it. For me, there's not a whole lot of romance in that.
Sure. I understand that.
It's kind of, I think I was talking to my sister-in-law recently and I said, well, you still have to do the grunt work. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember your grandma saying when grandpa retired, well, you got to retire, but I'm still cooking dinner and cleaning the house. When do I retire?
Right.
And so then they came up with then he's pitched in and
Yeah.
became more of a duo in the house stuff
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that is true. The grunt work still has to get done whether you're working or not. And the grunt work is not as bad. I do realize that the things that I didn't want to do, now I do because now I do with less animosity towards them because I have the time. So it's not like I'm trying to squeeze in
Yeah.
cleaning out a shower or washing a bathroom floor after I've already worked. Now this is my work in sort of a weird way. And so I
Totally.
don't have so much negative feelings around it. So I think you said something earlier about trying to find the joy in all the activities. They don't have to be necessarily certain ones that we conceive as being joyful,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, I made a little thing here on my paper that this idea of intentionality, I don't really remember that word growing up so much. I'm sure it was said around me, but I think the word
Yeah.
intentionality has become like a really big buzzword
I think so
with
too.
parents talking to their children. Now you need to be intentional, and
Yeah.
what is your intention? And I feel like more, and some of my peers might disagree with me, but I feel like we were more the follow the pack people.
Oh, is that right?
Like our grandparents did X, Y, and Z, and our parents did X, Y, and Z, so we did X, Y, and Z. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that some of my peer group would say, "Well, I saw what my grandparents did and my parents did, and I really didn't want to do X, Y, and Z. So
Right.
I didn't necessarily follow the pack, or I
Yeah.
did certain things."
Do you do you think that word is more prominent do you think it's more prominent in my generation?
Yes.
Do you think that's because my generation is going to therapy?
Well, my my generation went to therapy too, but not in big numbers, probably.
Right. We should look that up.
We should. That's a good Google statistic.
Well, I'm speaking super generally, but I do think that when you go to therapy, sometimes my therapist to me will be like, how do you want your week to look? What brings you joy? Or what was like your ideal morning? Or how do you create your life around the tasks you do have to do, but you can make them not acceptable to you, but what's the word I'm looking for? Compatible? Because
Okay.
there's things we don't want to do, right? I mean, absolutely. We don't want to pay bills. We don't want to look at our tax. There's like things that, but we have to do them or make a vet appointment or whatever it is. And they're
Right.
just weighing on you and you have to get them done. And so are you creating, like, okay, I'll speak for myself here with trying to, well, I am running my own business, but it's like, okay, Mondays, I'm not going to have any meetings because I really don't want to talk to anybody on a Monday. Tuesdays, maybe I'll do all the meetings on that day or most of them. And then the rest of the week, it'll be working for my clients. So it's like, okay, how do I know that I didn't want to take a meeting on Monday? Well, because I booked a lot of meetings on Mondays in the past and I was like really not up for them. So if I can change that one thing for myself because I can work for myself, then maybe that'll make the rest of my week better overall and I can be more efficient or more intentional with my time and create more joy in my week or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, a bunch of buzzwords.
Using
So I
all the
was thinking,
buzzwords.
yeah. Well, I was thinking
Mad
about the
libs.
fact that one of the words that wasn't prominent either when I was growing up was adulting.
Oh, that's such a millennial term.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to adult today. It became a verb. I don't want
It
it.
did.
I'm adulting, and I'm like, what do you mean you're mature and grown up and you got to do things? That's what I hear. I mean, I think the word is
Yeah.
cute, but
Yeah.
we didn't grow up with that word that we were adulting. I
Right.
think for me, and I don't, maybe it's a familial thing, but for me, it was like you got to a certain age, you pretty much knew that there were certain things you were going to have to do.
Yeah. See, I think for your generation, maybe that's true. I think for millennials, though, we kept getting setback after setback,
Right.
whether
I
it
get
was
that.
financial or couldn't find a job or so many different types of political and major social issues happening. Not that that wasn't happening during your generation, because it absolutely was. But yeah, I think our generation has lived through such
Turmoil?
turmoil. Yeah. And it's severely impacted us personally and as a huge community. And I think that those words, adulting, or I can't think of other words right now, but they come up probably from a shared experience and probably a shared trauma in some ways that I don't know that boomers created words like that.
Right. I mean, we may have felt the same way, and some of us
Right.
have been going through the same experience, but we didn't
Right.
call it that because
Exactly.
we knew we were adults and we knew we had to
See,
be
I don't,
adults.
right. And it's like, I feel like I washed on shore one day and now I'm like, oh, God, I'm in my 30s. Is this what an adult feels like? Is this what happened between my 20s and my mid 30s? I don't know. What was I doing? There was, it's so funny to me because it's like, okay, 18, cool, you vote and you're driving and whatever. And 21, you get to drink. And then 25, I don't know, that's a significant number. And then I guess 30 was significant, but I felt like I never hit that point in my life where I was like, okay, yeah, now's the time where I'm an adult. It just kind of flowed. But I don't know how many people experience that or if that's a millennial thing or a generational thing or what. I mean, we're talking about age and not feeling our age. And I feel that way too, where I just feel like I never hit this like threshold. And I think maybe you have to create that threshold for yourself in your life where you're like, okay, yeah, I should have kids because I want to and because this is the time to do it. Or I don't know, I'm gonna buy a house. All these things, I think maybe it's part of my personality, but I'm very non-committal in these big life transitions. But also, there's so much that comes into those transitions too, like being financially ready for those or capable or having access to all these things. And I think the accessibility piece too comes into play here too, where do you have access to do the quote unquote adult thing? If you don't, then maybe you're not going to feel like you're an adult.
Hmm.
Huh.
Well, I think you said a lot of legitimate things, and I think that if you speak
Except for
to
one
any,
thing. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, right. I don't know what that was.
No.
I'll find one. Uh, but I also have to do parenting. Here's the thing. I think if you talk to most people, nobody feels what they think is you're supposed to feel when you're grown up.
Right.
Okay, so you can be
Yeah.
92 and not feel like you think you're supposed to be grown up.
Yeah.
Because I think you have a core personality that can change because we have a core personality. Let me say this differently. You have a core personality, but your brain is malleable and you can learn new things and you can
Mm-hmm.
adjust to new situations, hopefully if you're not rigid, and you can think new thoughts. But the actual person inside of you is pretty much the same person,
Mm-hmm.
right? You might
Mm-hmm.
not recognize yourself as you get older and you look in the mirror, but ultimately your thought processes and the way you handle yourself is pretty much the same unless you make a concerted effort to change, and then that becomes you too,
Sure.
right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if anybody really knows what it feels to be grown up. I remember watching movies that were old movies when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
movies in the 40s and the 50s, and thinking, well, these were grown ups, and it was maybe just because they wore what was grown up clothing, or
Right.
the women wore gloves, or
Yeah.
the men wore hats, or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
now my mother, in her wonderful way of talking, when I was teaching, she said, I don't think there's a good enough delineation between teacher and student. I said, what are you talking about? She goes, well, the teachers go to school looking like the students. So that
Mm.
was a very narrow viewpoint about what her experience was, that they would look
Mm-hmm.
more professional, quote unquote, going to school
Mm-hmm.
than she noticed my teacher colleagues and myself looked.
Yeah.
And I said, well, teaching is an active occupation, more active than it was when we were going to school, because most of the time our teacher was at the chalkboard or behind her desk, whereas
Mm-hmm.
teachers now are more integrated in the classroom. They're
Yeah.
walking around, they're more present. They're
Mm-hmm.
not at their desks. They don't just give these sage on the stage lessons. They're
Right.
trying to evoke things from children on their own, that children can evoke on their own, and support that. So
Mm-hmm.
wearing heels and a skirt is just not practical,
Exactly.
right? If you're going to
Yeah.
bend down and do stuff, or if you're going to be on the yard with kids, you're modeling what you want them to do. So you have to be you're more comfortable in what
Right.
you're wearing. And it's wonderful
Mm-hmm.
to think that you're going to go to school looking a certain way, the way that we traditionally think about it. But that's just not how it is anymore. So you have to change that idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I think her point was that grown-ups don't even look like grown-ups. They look like ginormous children with their caps and their t-shirts. And my mother passed away, in 2005, and so these were thought processes from then. I don't know if she would still think the
Sure.
same way now. So I think that the idea of being grown up is a really vague understanding. I think what we think about being grown up is doing things that are grown up, that
Right.
you're allowed to do legally, and
Right.
that you have to do to keep yourself, because your parents are not taking care of you, so to keep yourself able to survive,
Mm-hmm.
buying groceries, having a paycheck, some kind of roof over your head,
Yes.
perhaps getting married, having children. Those are the transitional steps that make you look like a grown up, but what you feel
Yes.
inside may
Is
not be what it looks like on the outside, right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
the adulting thing I think is interesting. And then you were talking about, as soon as you started talking about the working and getting prepared and the intentionality, all of a sudden I realized that the majority of well, I don't know if I won't say majority because I can't know for a fact, but many of my peer group parents was one working parent and one stay-at-home parent. And the stay-at-home
Yes.
parent was a mother. And it's
Mm-hmm.
totally different when there's
Mm-hmm.
a stay-at-home mom than
Mm-hmm.
when both parents are
Mm-hmm.
working.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a different sort of cadence to the day when your mom's at home
Sure.
than they are when your mom is out working and your father is working too. And
Yeah.
nowadays I realize that there's also stay-at-home dads,
Yeah.
and but back in those days it was obviously mostly moms,
Yeah.
and there was a different rhythm to the day, because I remember wanting so badly to replicate what my mother had when I was in my 20s. Because the idea of going to work every day and preparing for work was anxiety, at times were anxiety provoking. I didn't know that there
Yeah.
was, I mean, I always knew on Sunday night I felt anxious. Now people on the internet talk about,
Yeah, the Sunday Scaries.
right. I
Yeah,
didn't, I didn't, I didn't know that was a thing. I thought it was just me felt that way.
well, that's the cool, and that is the one cool thing about social media that it's kind of interesting. It feels like one big inside joke in a
Right,
lot of ways that we all get to participate in. But finally now there's more, we're assigning terminology to these things that I think have always existed under capitalism and this kind of 9 to 5 work schedule, or just regular societal things that we've all experienced but never spoke out loud about. And I
right,
think it creates a collective experience now that everyone's trying to understand, and where I think that goes back to this idea of intentionality, where I think maybe it's not so much intentionality as we just have more access to each other in a way that we didn't have before. Like before it was like gossiping with your neighbors,
right.
but you still had to put on a certain persona so that you wouldn't be ostracized by your
Correct.
community.
Yes.
So it wasn't really that safe necessarily.
Right.
And especially now there's a whole spectrum of people who maybe some people think they're different or quote unquote weird or whatever, but that's also embraced because everybody's weird and
Right.
everybody has idiosyncrasies. And now we're just calling attention to these things. And I think that's creating, hopefully, obviously a better society for everybody, but it creates community and that helps with creating joy in your life. So, yeah, there's all these different pieces now that we have access to.
I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. And I think you can kind of sink into the idea that when these things are outed on social media or in other platforms, that you're not the only one and that you don't have to keep this private anymore. I mean, I spent a lot of growing up years worried about going to school on a Monday morning. And I would try to say to myself, well, why are you worried about it? You're going to see all your friends. But I always had a level of anxiety before
Mm-hmm.
going to school, especially after vacation or summer for sure, that I didn't think any of my other friends felt. And we didn't
Mm-hmm.
really talk about it that much until later on. Some people would say, oh, I couldn't sleep last night, or I was so excited to be here. And I think those are little snippets that people were having those same feelings. So when I was watching my mom raise kids and not having to work and then eventually starting her own business and doing those kinds of things, she still was able to have the flexibility of the life she wanted to have at home and at work. I just thought it was so relieving in a way. I did not have kids yet, so I didn't realize that it wasn't completely relieving because kids
Yeah.
in itself they're a job on their own. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's still all the anxiety about that. But just the idea that I could be at home and do the things I wanted to do at home while the kids were in school. Or I just thought that was so gonna look so wonderful until I actually went through it. And then, but I worked the whole time also,
Yeah.
so it was different. But I just thought it seemed, I don't know, so idyllic to be able
Mm-hmm.
to not have to be a working mom, but being a stay-at-home mom seemed really good to me because I got to see that in action,
Sure.
you know. And
Mm-hmm.
after my mom divorced my dad, then that went away because she had to go back to work for real,
Yeah.
and she was not at home, and the whole situation upended itself, and it wasn't the way it was, and it wasn't the amount of tension that we got before, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't didn't feel good to me at all. And because
Sure.
I was the eldest, I was I was sort of appointed as caretaker as well.
Yeah.
So it changed the way my life was going and sort
Mm-hmm.
of circumvented it to a different way.
Totally.
But right, so for myself, even though I had creative parents,
Mm-hmm.
and even though my mother was a person who was very creative and took us to lots of things when my dad was working and stuff, I think I relied so much on my mother's ability to keep us engaged that it took me a while as I was getting older and I moved out of the house and got married to realize that I had to do that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are really much better at doing things that they want to do than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I'm not joyful or I don't have joy. It's that I find joy in the observation of people doing the things. And
Ah.
I don't, and I didn't do it myself. And partially, and this is hard to even for me to say, I'm not going to say it out loud, partially is because when I was growing up, I never wanted to goof up or make a mistake.
Yeah.
So if I put myself in a new situation and tried something that other people were doing, there was a good possibility that I was going to goof up and then I was going to be made fun of. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be made fun of, so I just didn't do it. And
Yes.
I still have that in me as
Yeah.
a 67-year-old woman, but I'm
Totally.
trying to move past that. And I've done stuff,
Mm-hmm.
even still. I mean, people are going to say, what, you haven't done anything? Well, of course, I've done things and I've put myself in positions where I've had to do something different and new, but
Yes.
it's not something that comes naturally to me, where I think a lot of other people naturally are able to soothe themselves doing things that they enjoy. And that is not something I find natural for me. I can soothe myself emotionally, but
Yeah.
I haven't branched out, let's say, to work with ceramics or to knit. You know what I mean? That's not, I don't have like a burning desire
Yeah. But just
to
like
do
a
that.
curiosity to try new things, or not really because you're afraid?
I do have a curiosity, but I also
Mm-hmm.
have a level of maybe laziness. I don't like the word lazy. I was never lazy in my working life ever.
Yeah.
And I did over the top in my working life. I attended every freaking conference. I went to every professional development. I signed up for every volunteer and non and paid positions during the summer.
Did that bring you
But when
joy,
it,
Mom?
well, in a way, because I'm kind of a convention nerd, I like to be around people. So I
Yeah.
guess my hobby and my creating joy for me would be immersing myself with people.
Totally. I relate to this. Yes.
Okay, learning about
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
how they're conducting their lives, what their experience is like. But that's,
Yes.
I guess, why we're doing this podcast in a way.
We're very social. I think we're social
Yes,
butterflies. You and
very
I,
social.
yeah,
Right,
I like to go to a party and talk to everybody.
right. Me too. So
Yeah.
when somebody doesn't talk to me, I get like, why aren't they talking to me? Well, like, what's wrong with them?
Yes.
Or I'll go
Me
over to
too.
them, right? But then sometimes
Yeah.
I get a little bit of a edge to myself, a chip, and I'm like, I'm not going over there.
I
Why do
oh
I
my
keep doing that? I
God,
should
me
stay there,
too. What? I
right?
didn't know
Right?
that.
And so I get kind of stubborn in that thought because I'm
Me
like, okay,
too.
I've done it. I've done all this. Why aren't you responding back?
Yes.
But you know,
I judge people
so
really harshly if they don't smile at me. I know that sounds like super weird, and obviously telling someone to smile or anything like that is not okay, but
no,
especially towards women or anyone. But if someone's like not outwardly nice to me when I first meet them, I'm like, what's up with you? And I really try not to judge people because obviously I don't want the first impression to be my only impression, but I have that same feeling with you too. That's so funny. I didn't know that. I thought that was just a
yeah,
me thing.
no, and I think that I have made lots of adjustments over my life because I've realized that maybe I'm talking too much and I need to. So now I change all that up. And when somebody when I'm with people, I ask them about them. I
Yeah.
talk more about their experience, and then I'll interject my stuff because I thought for a while maybe I was being too much of me and not enough of them. So I adjusted for that. I'm just very inclusive, and
Yeah.
I just really like the whole conversational nature of the relationship. And so it's
Me
hard
too.
for me when I'm with maybe family who aren't as conversational or don't ask as many
Yes.
questions, or
Yes.
if I'm in a group because I feel like I have to expend, or I kind of want them to expend the energy, but I do it.
Hmm.
But there are times that I come from certain situations depleted because I haven't felt like it was back and forth enough.
Mutual.
Right,
Yes. I relate
right,
to that.
right. But most of the time I come back feeling more energized
Hmm.
that I've had this experience with somebody, and
Me too.
I want it to go on. I'm a little bit greedy when it comes to that. So the idea of throwing pots, now you're going to a class, you're going to be with people who are all doing the same thing, and then you
Yeah.
can create that environment, which is why I like teaching so much. I mean, I think I mentioned before that I was probably the only one who got excited about half day Wednesdays because I got to hang out with my colleagues in the professional development. They're like, this is crappy. We don't want to do any of this. Well, I
Yeah.
think it needs to be quality professional development. Let me put it that way. But I
Sure.
still, even if it wasn't quality professional development, I still liked being in the sort of think tank of being with my colleagues,
Sure.
right? me, that
Yeah.
was my hobby. I liked that.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's what I like to do. So a
Yeah.
solitary hobby just doesn't seem all that fun
Fun
to
for
me.
you.
I am at home and
Even in
I
a group
do
setting?
in a group setting I think it's much better as
Yeah.
long as the people, but if they're really focused on what they're doing,
Yeah.
maybe that's why they have the wine and paint stuff now, so that you're not that focused on the thing, but you're still enjoying the people. Plus,
Social activity.
right, exactly. So you don't want to get too like. It's okay to not want to talk to people. I get that. I just
Sure.
it's not my nature not to, but there are times I seriously do not want to talk to people.
Yeah.
I'm not
Oh,
always.
yeah. Me too. So
Oh,
I want to talk more about the ceramics thing because a friend of mine
yeah,
was taking a ceramics class, and then I think two of her friends joined the class too, and then they got really discouraged about their pottery making skills because they were comparing themselves to our friend. And I was like, I feel like that takes away from the joy of just trying something new or just trying something because one, people stop short their joy in a way because of comparison or
hmm
because they're new at something and they don't want to feel embarrassed
right,
trying something new. But who knows, maybe if they took more classes they could get to that person's level. I mean, you never know. So it's just, I think it's interesting to me because I would rather try something and be terrible at it than not try it at all, because I think that's the experience is the trying of the thing, for me
right.
anyway.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I think that as soon as we start comparing ourselves, then game over,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that just for me, it's tactile. So I can imagine how wonderful it would be to put a piece of clay on a potter's wheel and just get all gooey
Yeah.
and mold it. And that's kind of why I want to do that.
Mhm.
But I also spend time at home with nothing going on. No, I rarely put the TV set on during the day because I think there's nothing really good on TV during the day unless I'm going to go to a service like Hulu or Netflix or whatever. But I don't
Yeah.
do that during the day. Sometimes I put music on, but the
Mhm.
most of the time I'm spending doing quiet activities at home
Yeah.
until my husband comes home, and then we start doing the whole dinner, whatever, and
Yeah.
what we're going to watch on TV or whatever we're going to do afterwards. But I do miss the hubbub of having a lot of people in the house. There
Yeah.
is that I
Mhm.
do miss.
Yeah.
So I guess my retirement, if I was going to call my retirement something, it would be to cultivate more hobbies
Yeah.
that would cultivate more joy.
Sure.
That would be
I,
my joy.
I like that for you. And I came back from a trip last weekend and I have been wanting to get, I don't know if you're familiar with tarot cards,
Oh,
but
yes.
yeah, okay. Well, for years I've been wanting to get a deck of my own tarot cards because years ago in my mid 20s, I used to pull a card like every morning from my roommate's deck and I just thought it was like a fun thing to do.
Right,
Kind of set the tone for the day or just give you insight. Who knows?
right,
So I think because I'm in a major transition in my life and feeling very precarious about a lot of things, I was like,
right.
oh, maybe a tarot card deck will help me ground into my despair. No, I'm kidding. But
No, this episode is about creating joy.
it is, which my point, thanks for bringing me back to my point. I know a lot of people like to buy things because that makes you happy to kind of, spend
Right.
money and buy stuff for yourself. It's a nice feeling, but I do feel like really happy about having these tarot cards because I was doing spreads. It's when you pull a certain types of cards in a certain way and like with a question or a thought in mind, and then you read about what the cards represent. And I just think it's a really cool way to kind of investigate yourself and investigate your time in your life. And just for the moment, it doesn't have to mean that this is what it's always going to be because things are always fluctuating. But I buying those tarot cards brought me a lot of joy. And then doing the activity of the tarot reading for myself has brought me a lot of joy. So there are these like little moments where I'm like, oh yeah, I like these little kind of rituals. We were talking about like the threshold into adulthood or these like thresholds in our lives. And I think a lot of the
Right.
times we have to create our own thresholds we step over that creates a ritual in our life or a moment in our life that we celebrate. Because that's another thing I've been doing now too, is just trying to celebrate all of the small wins, no matter what they are, because I think that brings me a lot of joy too, especially in times of major transition or or turmoil, whether that's inner or outer, whatever is going on for you. So yeah, those tarot cards, A plus on bringing me joy. I'm so happy I got them.
Awesome. You don't remember the tarot cards we had here? Because
No.
I bought Nana tarot cards,
Oh, you did?
and then I got them back after she passed away. They're probably here somewhere.
Oh my
Yeah, because she was
gosh.
very interested in that. So
Oh.
I guess I don't know if you remember them because they were probably up with all the games. Because
No, I
like,
don't know that I do, but now I'm interested in getting them.
yeah. But
Yeah.
so you said these little celebrating these little moments of success. Remember our dance of joy at home?
Yeah.
Yeah, with you and your brother, we did the dance of joy when somebody had a success or got a certificate or just had a win, whatever that was. We used to hold hands and do the dance of joy,
To the
whatever
dance of
that
joy.
dance was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting because I think I was able. I hope I was able. And don't tell me I didn't do it. But I hope I was able to create joy for you and
You
your
did.
brother.
I think
But
that's why
I
I'm able
think
to think about my childhood as joyful, even though it had a really traumatic moment. Or,
yeah, and that's I
so
was going to
yes.
talk about that because when your dad was not doing well, and we had the we had the pet rats, and I have to go to the pet store all the time and get the pine bedding and all that stuff.
I love the
We went
rats.
into Petco one day, and there was a store cat, and that was Socks, and
Yeah.
he was now 3 months old. He was walking around the store,
Yeah.
and I said, "Is he adoptable?" And he said, "Yeah, nobody's adopted him yet. We just let him wander the store. He's fine." And so I said, I kind of want to have him. And so
Hmm.
in order to have him, I needed to buy they gave him to me for free, but I had to buy the litter box and all the stuff. So I did that, and I brought him home. I didn't tell your father I was doing that. And I was in therapy at the time. And I remember having a therapy session where you actually went to the office and saw the person. I haven't done that in a long time. It's all been virtual. And my therapist, his name was Carol, said to me, "Oh, you needed joy, and you took the cat spontaneously."
Hmm.
And that was like, what? I didn't cognate or even articulate that
Hmm.
that I did this because I needed my own joy.
Hmm.
And so I got the cat. And so that was really good because, we had him. We didn't have him long enough because, poor
I
guy, he got
know.
cancer.
He's a
But he was really smart cat. I mean, he taught himself to go potty on
pee
the
on the
toilet.
toilet. I know.
Yeah, what the hell
The
is that?
90s before TikTok. Could have
Right,
been a
exactly.
viral
I couldn't
video.
even, I know, I couldn't even, I think I may have taken a picture of it, but I couldn't share it with
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
I could, physically. But anyway, they were here. But so that stands out to me because, yeah, it was a pretty dark time
Hmm.
that we were going through, but at the same time I think that I was able to realize I needed something to bring it back into something
Yeah.
that was more joyful and focus more on something that would be fun.
Yeah.
And I did that, but I didn't think to myself, "Oh, I need joy, so I'm getting this
Right.
cat." I just
Right.
did it sort of
It's like
surreptitiously.
innate. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Something to
And
do to protect
yeah,
yourself or yeah, that's
yeah,
cool.
and we've always labeled things from the beginning of time,
Hmm.
but a lot of these words are newish to me, at least.
Or how
In
we're using them is newer.
Right,
Yeah.
right, okay. So that in itself is intentionality.
Yeah.
That we're purposely, right? We're
Yeah.
purposely using words that sort of intentionally focus us on a certain, I don't know, activity or way of life,
Yeah. Mindset,
right?
you would say. You could say.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. So that's pretty
It's interesting.
it's pretty amazing.
It is. I wanted to
Yeah.
share a little something that's silly, but I was unloading the dishwasher the other day and
Yes.
there was a new true crime doc on TV.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I'm excited to watch that true crime doc. And then I was thinking, because you used to watch Dateline when I was a kid,
Yeah,
and I
I
was
watch
like,
it.
yeah, I'm sure you do. And at that age, it's grim, it's scary. You don't want to watch that
Yeah.
as a kid.
Why are
But
you
that's
watching that kind of thing? Yeah.
yeah, why are you watching that? But in my 30s now, I'm like, oh, that's so exciting. And that sounds so dark, obviously, because it's terrible that there's murder. But I think that's when you get to an age when you get to enjoy the things that you saw other adults enjoying or participating in. and then you get to do that for yourself. That's how I knew. I was like, oh yeah, I'm an adult now. I'm
Right.
excited to
Well,
watch a true crime doc.
that's a very good point because I think for me it was realizing that I was starting to enjoy listening to the news. Or not, I
Yes.
don't know if the word enjoy or just interested in listening to the news.
Interested. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or reading national news stories
Yeah.
or international, whatever it was. That's when I started to realize because I didn't understand when I was a kid why grown-ups would watch this. It was boring.
Yeah.
But when you get older, you realize it's insightful
It's
and you
insightful
want
or
to
the
know.
mystery or yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And I know that your brother said to me, I don't know why you watch the crime stuff, the Dateline. What's in it for you? And I said,
Mm,
honestly, it's not. It's tragic that the person ceases to exist. But
absolutely.
for me, it was the puzzle, the solving the puzzle, especially
Hmm.
cold cases, and what law enforcement does in terms of detective work to piece everything together and how they interview people and they go. I mean, they go back to
Yes.
records that are 30 years old and they're able to find
Able to
one or two things that break open
yeah,
the case that somebody
I
else
know.
didn't see before that.
It's amazing.
So to me, there's a talent in that, and I'm interested in knowing what that is.
I
And then
agree.
nowadays they have the genealogy, they have the forensic
Hmm.
genealogy, which is flipping amazing. And,
Yes.
so
It's very
I
cool.
think all of that makes it interesting for me. And I think you're right. I
Yeah.
think that you get to a certain age where things that you would absolutely not ever think to watch or read, all of a sudden you're watching and reading. And that
Hmm.
might be a signal that you're mature enough to be able to embrace that content
Hmm.
and understand it and find the value in it. Maybe not
Hmm.
exactly joy, but
Sure.
value
Value.
in knowing that.
Yes, that
You
makes
know,
sense. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think being a detective of your own life it brings me
yeah,
joy to
yeah,
uncover things about myself and about the people in my life. So that's a big part of
yeah,
yeah, what I enjoy about yeah, existing.
yeah. No, I totally get it. In fact, the other part of that is, and what I have a friend who does that, who has done that, and she's done a really great job doing that. Now, I would like to do it, but I have a cousin in on the East Coast who is starting to study the genealogy of our family,
Mm,
and she just sent me documents, and I'm like, oh, whoa, this is going to be awesome to see this.
wow.
And she's trying to figure out people in our family and how they're connected. And then a niece who was tested, who sent her DNA to 23andMe, and now there's a whole list of possible cousins that I'm sending to my other cousin
Oh,
to see
wow.
if any of these names come up in the genealogy that she's looking for or at. And so that's fascinating.
It is. I'm
Yeah, I think there's a
super
lot of
fascinated by that.
yeah, there's a lot of satisfaction. So maybe joy is also satisfaction. There's a lot of
Yeah.
satisfaction in learning about your family and just getting to know yourself better.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably what also helps to sustain joy,
Hmm. Yeah.
as well.
Hmm.
You know. But I think that on the whole other side, which we didn't talk about, you mentioned it a little bit, having children, I think that was what people look towards for joy, like
Yeah.
see it through the eyes of a child was always
Right.
like you can't really enjoy the holidays without having a child around.
Mm.
And I can sort of relate to that because it is different when
Hmm.
you when your children are around and you're doing traditional things with your family and you're
Yeah.
trying to teach them those traditions
Right.
than when you do it on your own without your children. But there's satisfaction there too. I think it's transitional
I
and
think so
you
too.
and things change. I mean, you change the way you do the tradition when you're not with your children, and or maybe you don't.
Hmm.
But I think that's another avenue that people look to, and I don't know that. I mean, it's true because I live that, but I don't think a person that decides not to have children can't also accumulate the same amount of joy or maybe even more joy.
Sure. Yeah.
You
Because the
know,
way I see my life if I don't have kids is, wow, there's so many things I want to try and
right,
do.
right,
So that's, yeah, it's just, I could live my life just taking classes. Like, I wish I could
right.
get paid for that.
I'm a critic of classes and get paid
Yeah.
for that.
Sounds too niche.
Well,
In this economy?
everything is niche, isn't it? I have had female friends throughout the year, and I'm specifically because that's how they identify, who intentionally did not get married
Hmm.
because they knew there was too much. They wanted to sop up, and
Yeah.
they didn't want to be. They knew that they wouldn't be able to put the effort into a marital relationship and
Hmm.
divide their time if
Yeah.
they got married. And I didn't think about that either.
You're
I
like, damn
spent
it. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, well, I spent quite a few years single, but
Yes.
part of those single years, I was still raising children.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then once you guys left the nest, then I had to raise myself again. So I did have a period of time where I, wasn't married and my children were at home, and that I
Yeah.
could focus and figure out what I wanted to do. And that's when I started to create a new social group and
Hmm.
and get more actively involved in a congregation and
Hmm.
do social justice work and just fun social things,
Hmm.
which I still
It's nice
continue
to have
now.
that time to really investigate yourself because I think that's like a huge difference too in our generation too is having the opportunity to investigate yourself and the privilege to be able to investigate yourself and really choose the path you want and then to be able to change that path. Whereas I think a lot of people just go forth recreating traditional things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But are we truly, really thinking about our lives and what we want out of them?
Right. And I think it also depends on how you were raised. I mean, if you were raised
Mm-hmm.
in a household where your mother valued marriage or your parents
Mm-hmm.
valued marriage, and I'm thinking about it in terms of my mother because I think I modeled more of my mother than I did my father, and she really thought partnership was important, then your focus is, I'm going to find myself somebody to marry,
You're right.
right? Because I'm going to do what my mother's been basically telling me to do, maybe not directly, but indirectly modeling for me, this is the
Mm-hmm.
life that you'll enjoy because I enjoy it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's where the difference between not following the pack and being more intentional comes in.
Right.
Because if you do follow what your parents told you to do, you might regret that because you didn't go on your own, you didn't get a chance to do your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to explain to them what your intentionality is or not. You don't have to tell them anything if you don't want to, if you're an adult, and pick a different path that might lead right back to where you would have gone anyway. You might just take a different path for a while and come back to that path.
Exactly.
Yeah. It is interesting because there's a part of me that wonders maybe I wasn't as intentional as I could have been. But I think that the decisions I made at the time they were happening were intentional decisions,
Sure.
obviously.
Yeah.
I
Of
just
course.
wasn't thinking about all the possibilities.
You can't.
Yeah,
It's impossible to. I
I
mean,
guess so.
what did Pa say? He said, did he say this to me? He said, you can only make decisions based on the knowledge you have in the moment.
Well, yeah, in fact, he once said to me, that's interesting that you bring that up because he once said to me, too bad people don't record in a journal why they made the decision and when they made it. Because then you could go back to your journal and say, oh, this is why we decided to do this. When you have a regret, like, why did we do this? What were
Right.
we thinking? You go back and you say, oh, January 1st, 1998, this happened. Oh, this is why we chose that.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can maybe feel better about that decision because you were in the
Hmm.
moment, the environment at the time made you make that decision or helped you to make that decision.
Exactly.
But we don't do
Exactly.
that. We're not intentional in that way. Very often, most
No.
most of the time, the bigger things in life seem to be maybe slightly off the cuff.
Yeah. Or it's really just in our heads and we're just grappling with all of these
Right,
different things in our heads and
right,
we have a hard time communicating it
right,
even in a journal. So,
right.
yeah.
Like, I think for me, it's especially the idea of picking a partner. And I also think for me, it's understanding that just because you're partnered up doesn't mean you give away your life to that
Absolutely
partnership,
not.
right?
Yeah. Your life
And
is still
that,
yours.
but see, we weren't raised that way. We were raised
Hmm.
that this is your all, this person that you pick is your everything.
Yeah. I
They're
mean,
going to
even
make
I was
you
slightly
happy.
raised like that. I mean,
Yeah,
in my teenage years. I mean, not that you did that to me, but society.
Right.
Society's a
Right.
powerful drug.
Right. It's romantic love and the
Hmm.
whole thing about this is what you do. But
Yeah.
now, and I think people are finding out finally that you can very much have a successful relationship, but keep your individual identities very much intact
Yeah.
and have separate interests and shared interests,
Yeah.
and
And
that the
let's be more
idea of
joyful.
falling in love. The one thing I do like about some of these reality shows is that some of the experts say things that are, I think, spot on. And the idea of falling in love is a misnomer. You have to come to the table every day with the intentionality to be in love.
Yeah.
You can
It's a
feel love
choice.
feel it's a choice. You can
It's a
feel
choice.
love feelings and you can be
Yeah.
attracted to somebody, but the,
Hmm.
the choice of loving somebody is a choice.
Yeah.
The act, I should say, the act of loving somebody is a choice.
Yeah.
And the idea that you wake up, if you happen to be married, you wake up every morning and say, I'm choosing marriage today. And if you're in a partnership without marriage, I'm choosing this partnership today. I wasn't raised like that. I was raised with the romantic version of love and
Yeah.
Cinderella and all that stuff. But I did meet a woman not too long ago. She was in her 80s, and her husband had passed away, but they had a long marriage, and they went on many vacations together, but they also honored the vacations they wanted to go on alone. And she would stay home with the kids, and he would trek and do what he wanted to do, and he would come home, and she would plan a trip, and he would stay home with the kids, and she would go and do her thing because it's impossible to find somebody who is going to like every little part. You might find
Hmm.
somebody who wants to be with you no matter what and go
Yeah.
and have the experience with you, but you also might find that the person that you're in partnership with don't want to do that
Right.
and doesn't want to leave the house that particular week or go with you to this particular thing, and you go by yourself and you can have just as much joy on your own, which I didn't. That was something I was worried about when your dad died.
Hmm.
How am I going to have this joy of going to places without being able to share it with somebody else?
Yes, I totally. It's been really drilled for us that you have to experience things with someone else to, yeah, have the experience. But so many of my greatest memories are kind of when I've been by myself a lot, or little moments throughout my day, or it's a hike that I did by myself, and I'm like, oh, that was super memorable. I didn't do it with anybody else; it was just me.
Right,
So yeah, I think you're right. Our society is so caught up in being partnered,
right,
and that's what's meaningful. But really, I think I just listened to something that was like being witnessed is what's really important about being alive, is that you just, someone acknowledges your existence and validates your experiences.
right.
And it's easier to do that when you're partnered up for sure. But even sometimes your partner's not going to validate you. So you have
That's
to
right.
validate you, and you have to just still have your own experiences that bring you joy with or without someone else.
Yeah, no, and I think I obviously wound up being able to do that more easily than I thought I would.
Yeah.
But I think that, and even now that I'm in partnership, I sometimes I intentionally say to myself, he's going to have his experience, I'm going to have my experience. We're at the same place at the same time, but I can't possibly have the same experience. I can share my experience. He can share his experience, but I don't have to. I don't have to help him through his experience or vice versa in order for me to have joy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have to
Yeah.
bring things to his attention. He doesn't have to bring things to my attention. We can have our separate experience together,
Exactly.
right? I think that that's what I was afraid of, that I wasn't going to be able to have a separate experience, enjoy it without somebody to communicate the experience with. Joy is hard.
It is hard. It's a
Yeah.
practice, I guess, right? You have to
Yeah,
practice
I
joy.
think, well, see, that's a term too. I think that everything is a practice.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of terms.
There's a lot of terms.
I mean,
Yeah.
everything is a practice. I mean, it's
Yes.
like when my son says to me, when I get tipsy after one drink, and he says, well, that's because you don't practice. I think that's hysterical because I never thought about it that way. Like even being a connoisseur of alcohol,
Yeah.
and not to the point where you're drunk off your ass. I'm not talking about that. But being able to have a couple of drinks and not be too tipsy is a practice
Sure.
because you're savoring that over a period of time. And it's something you do. Whereas for
Hmm.
me, I don't do it very often. So when I do it, it's like, oh, after one drink, I'm a lightweight,
Same.
right?
You and I don't
Yeah.
drink that much.
Right, right. So just the idea that you have to practice with anything is true.
It is true.
Everything's
Relationships,
yeah,
friendship,
yeah,
relationship to self.
Yeah. Oh, now we're
I know, there's so much. Anyway, next episode topic.
yeah. So what's your last word? What did we learn? So a
Hmm.
long time ago, we were putting together a computer desk. My sister was there, you were there, your brother was there, and we were putting the thing together. And we inadvertently threw the box out. We had instructions,
Hmm.
but we didn't have like the final look of what it was going to look like. We just had all the parts, and then finally at the end,
Yeah.
and the box had what it, we wanted to see what it looked like from the beginning before we got to the end. And then I think maybe we thought we might have to return it, but we didn't. We got it together. At the end of the whole process, we all looked at each other and said, what did we learn? Don't throw away the box.
Yeah.
So for the longest time, we would
Okay.
say, what do we learn? Don't throw away the
Well,
box. So I'm
yes.
asking, besides don't throw away the box, what did we learn today? Did we learn anything today?
I know. Well, let's see. You have to find things that bring you joy,
Yes,
and you shouldn't be afraid to try new things if it's going
yes.
to bring you joy. Creating space in your life is important, even though it's really hard to do. Relationships and friendships and being involved in community is a joyful experience.
And I'm going to
Yeah,
add one.
sure.
I will say practice, practice, practice.
I love it.
Muzzle tough.
Mazel tov. L'chaim. Are we
Yes,
just saying Yiddish
yes.
now? Hebrew?
I could say amen, but Mazel Tov came to my mind.
Oh my God.